Five Nights at Freddy's is one of those horror game franchises that really doesn't need any introductions. If you've been on the internet for the past 7 years or so, you probably know everything there is to know about Five Nights at Freddy's. There have been countless lore videos discussing pretty much the same topic over and over and over and over again. And the story by this point has become sadly predictable, as they keep retreading on past ideas and it just kind of feels like we're going in a circle basically, which is very disappointing because recently in the research I did for this video, I stumbled upon a very interesting set of connections that could introduce a brand new type of horror into Fnaf and greatly expand upon the universe if Scott and the writers decide to go through with these ideas. This video is primarily inspired by two other YouTubers who already talked about this topic, that being Mr. Springs and Ozone. I'll leave a link to their channels into the description. Like, this video would not be possible without the work that they did. I will be adding my own interpretations onto this subject just so it feels a little bit different. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. Now, this video is primarily made for people who already have a deep understanding of FNAF's lore, so just in case you happen to be one of those people who have better things to do with their brain than to look too deep into this stuff, I'll give you a very quick plot summary for you, just so we're on the same page. FNAF's story primarily focuses around the main antagonist, William Afton, who has 40 different names, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll just refer to him as William, who is the co-owner and co-founder of a chain of pizza restaurants known as Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, which also have 40 different names. Alongside his close friend and business partner, Henry Emily, things are looking pretty good until tragedy strikes in the year 1983, where William's son, Evan, is killed in a tragic accident by his older brother, Michael Afton. This leads William to go on a murder spree where he first kills Henry's daughter, Charlie, in the back alley of one of the restaurants, and would later go on to murder 5 more children in an event known as the Missing Children's Incident. These 6 children collectively would possess 6 of the animatronic characters in the pizza restaurants. And that is a very brief and very quick summary of FNAF's story. There's a ton more I left out, so if you really want to know more, just go and look it up on YouTube. There have been countless theory videos that talk about this sort of thing, but I don't want to drag this out any longer than it has to, because it would literally be like 5 hours long if I did that. So let's get into the primary focus of today's video. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 introduces us to a brand new type of animatronics known as the Nightmare animatronics. It's never made explicitly clear as to what these Nightmare animatronics are in the games. In the books, they are confirmed to be some sort of like normal animatronics that have like sound illusion based technology or something, but it's never confirmed to be the case in the games, as the only hints we have towards this sort of thing are a set of map layouts in FNAF sister location, as well as security feeds of the FNAF 4 location, but we're never explicitly shown that this is the case. Some voice lines in Ultimate Custom Night do confirm that they at one point were just illusions in the mind of the protagonist of that game, but again, it's never made explicitly clear as to what these Nightmare animatronics are. Now, there are 2 of these Nightmare animatronics in particular that I want to focus on, those 2 being Nightmare and Nightmarion. Nightmare and Nightmarion both first appeared in FNAF 4, however, it was confirmed that Nightmarion's appearance in FNAF 4 is not canon, but later on appearances that feature Nightmare are implied to be canon. So if there's any confusion about that sort of thing, there you go. Anyway, Nightmare is commonly believed to be a depiction of the Grim Reaper or Death for Evan in Fnaf 4, as it takes the form of a twisted version of Nightmare Fredbear, which is the animatronic responsible for Evan's death in Fnaf 4. Nightmare basically represents the same thing as Nightmare. However, instead of being a depiction of the thing responsible for Evan's death, is instead a dark reflection of William Afton's first victim, Charlie, who went on to possess the puppet animatronic. Now, it's worth pointing out that despite being classified as two completely different animatronics, there are a few subtle hints that imply that Nightmare and Nightmare are the same entity. And it all starts all the way back in Fnaf 4. Nightmare is literally just a reskin of a Nightmare. They have the exact same behavioral patterns and share the same noises, and their jump scares, if you compare them, and they overlap. You can see in this image right here that Nightmare's mouth perfectly lines up with Nightmare's teeth, and their eyes don't cover each other, and they are featured through Nightmare's mask. It's almost like the Nightmare animatronic is wearing Nightmare's mask as a mask. Well, yeah, that made sense. On top of that, they both have the same theme, that being death. One representing the machine responsible for someone's death, and the other representing the first murder victim of a serial killer. The parallels are pretty similar. It's worth pointing out too that Nightmare bears a striking resemblance to how dead children are commonly depicted in Fnaf's story. Ever since Fnaf 2, dead children have been depicted as monochromatic spirits that take the form of black and white children with black tear streams running down their face, and Nightmare shares this exact same design feature. Their color palette is entirely monochromatic, they featuring only black and white, and they also have the same tear strings running down their face. Now, there are more hints that imply this to be the case, but I would highly recommend you check out Mr. Spring's video on this as they go into more detail about it, because I want to get right to the cut of the chase. While it's easy for us to just write off Nightmare and Nightmare as being just the Grim Reaper taking on different forms, I think there's another way to interpret this, I think it's incredibly interesting and would be really cool to introduce this to Fnaf's lore. I think Nightmare is Fnaf's take on an eldredge horror. Let me explain. In its most basic definition, eldredge horror is something that is uncanny, unearthly, and weird in a supernatural way. Most people attribute these themes of eldredge horror to H.P. Lovecraft's fiction, as well as those who have come after him and have tried to emulate his work. What kind of got me thinking in this direction was in Fnaf Help Wanted, in the Night Terrors minigame, Nightmare appears as the second sort of boss character that you could face in it. And the way Nightmare is portrayed is very much akin to something that of an eldredge horror, as when you're in the room, you have to like move back and forth throughout the room looking for Nightmare in the hallway, but when you turn around you can see these like tentacles coming out from beneath the bed and the ceiling, and it just is very evocative of that sort of type of horror. Fear of the unknown is one of the most powerful fears that we could possibly feel as human beings, as our minds are not able to comprehend that which is unknown, and the thing that you don't see is oftentimes more scarier than the thing you do see. And I think Nightmare and Nightmare being the exact same entity only enhances this fear, because if it's true that Nightmare and Nightmare are the same entity, that would imply that they are a shapeshifter and they could take on multiple different forms. In the Cthulhu mythos, which is the primary setting for H.P. Lovecraft's stories, there exists a character known as Nyarlathotep, who is the direct son of Azathoth. And if any of those names sounded like I butchered them, that's the whole point, as their names are supposed to be not pronounceable by human tongue. Anyway, Nyarlathotep is an outer god that has the ability to take on multiple different forms. It is said that he has over 1,000 different forms that he uses to mess with those who are exposed to him. And it kind of reminded me a lot of Nightmarion, as if Nightmarion and Nightmare are the same entity, this would imply that what we're seeing is simply two different avatars of this nightmare entity. Another connection that I thought was pretty interesting are the staff bots in Security Breach that bear a striking resemblance to Nightmarion, with Mr. Springs going far as to say they're even a cult. And you could definitely see where he's coming from with that, as in the area and in this area where you see all these like post-it notes and these manic scribblings, you can see very cult-like imagery with like the staff bot heads acting almost like candles, like a shrine to this Nightmarion entity. It's pretty well established that in the Cthulhu mythos that the outer gods and the old gods have various cults that worship them, and this cult imagery is definitely a worthy comparison to make. What's also interesting, I like to point out, is the post-it notes that you can see in this room. I remember in Pat's video that he thinks that these post-it notes were left by Gregory as he's like basically trying to become sentient or something. I can't go further into detail because it's kind of ridiculous. Anyway, I choose to believe that these post-it notes are just the insane scribblings of one of the characters in Security Breach. Most likely Vanny, as it's implied in one of the endings that Vanny has direct control over these Nightmarion staff bots, which would seem to indicate that she is aware of Nightmarion's existence, or this nightmare entity, as we could refer to it as. And what's interesting about that is that in the Cthulhu mythos, when people are exposed to these eldredge horrors, they tend to go insane. And I think we could see that happening with Vanny here. Because if she is aware of the Nightmarion's entity, then, and if Nightmarion is supposed to be Fnaf's take on an eldritch horror, these post-it notes can be written off as Vanny slowly going insane over exposure to this nightmare entity. And also the fact that she's possessed by William Afton, but again, like, it's too complicated. I don't want to get into that shit. Just trust me, it's way too complicated to get into right now. Another thing that I think is pretty interesting is you could actually see the effects that this nightmare entity has on the cast as a whole. Because if we assume that this Nightmarion entity is also Nightmare, then that would mean that its first appearance, it probably appeared shortly after Evan's death. And if we take this as death is some sort of eldritch horror, which would make sense if you really think about it, because like one of the primary themes of eldritch horror is like the idea of existentialism and like trying to comprehend like our place in the universe, and there's nothing more that could fill you with existential dread than the idea that we are all living on borrowed time and we are all just floating around in the cosmos and our lives are basically just meaningless and we're all just gonna die at some point. We could therefore interpret this as like maybe the reason why William Afton went on to do what he did is because he wasn't in his right mind, that the exposure to death, this entity, made him go insane, and that's why he murdered Charlie in the back alley and would go on to murder 5 other children. And it's also implied that he is trying to achieve immortality. And there's another interesting connection to Lovecraft's work that I think is pretty fascinating. In Lovecraft's short story, The Reanimator, Herbert West is a scientist trying to cheat death by using this liquid serum that he concocted in order to bring the dead back to life. Now, anybody who's ever played Fnaf before will know of this little thing called a remnant, which is basically like liquid molten metal that Afton uses to give life to these animatronics in the sister location. Later on in Pizza Simulator, when we see Henry Emily, we could tell that he's going crazy throughout the entire events of Five Nights at Freddy's. Like, the death of his daughter is really weighing heavy upon his shoulders, and the death surrounding the pizzerias is slowly driving him mad. The entire franchise revolves around the concept of death and the effect that death has on us as human beings. We could see William is denying the fact that his children are dead, as he is attempting to bring them back to life with the use of molten metal remnant, and Henry is attempting to make amends for all the wrongdoing that William has done due to the death that he had wrought upon the pizzerias and his family. Now, there are a ton of more connections that I found in my research for this video, but this video is almost about to be like 20 minutes long, so I'm going to quickly wrap up with my thoughts on this subject and what I would like to see from the writing team going forward. I don't necessarily believe any of this is true. I think it's just a lot of happy coincidences that I stumbled upon, but if this does wind up to be true, it would be a really interesting way to shake up the Fnaf formula by introducing a brand new type of evil into Fnaf to compete with William. Because one of the major criticisms that Fnaf has faced in recent years is its over-reliance on William as an antagonist. The fact that they keep bringing this dude back to life just so they could have him like be present in the games is really just like kind of overdone at this point. And I think it would be a really interesting way to bump him off if they send this like death entity after him to claim his soul and bring it to the afterlife. And like, it's not necessarily a stretch of the imagination for this to be a thing, because Fnaf clearly has like supernatural elements with the like the spirits of the dead children, like remnant and agony and all that sort of things. So it's not, I don't think it's too much of a stress to suggest this to be a thing. But then again, like, I don't know, like, these were just like a bunch of like coincidences that I found. So I'm curious to think what you guys think of all this. I'll be really curious to see what the community has to say on this topic. So if you really like this video, feel free to hit the like and subscribe buttons and share this video with like the community, and kind of have people I want to get people talking about this, because I think it was a very interesting set of connections. Whether or not this is true, I don't know, but I think it would be a really cool thing for the writers to introduce into Fnaf. Like, again, there's a ton more that I found, but I don't want to drag out this video any longer than it has to be. So if you guys want to see more stuff I found, I could make another video on this, or like you could like bring this up with like other people. Like, you could just share this to kind of get people talking about it, because I think this is like a really interesting idea, and I'm kind of curious to see what the community would have to say on this topic. Alright, sorry if I seemed like I was stuttering a lot, or like if I was like nervous. I'm kind of like, this is my first time kind of doing this sort of thing. So if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and subscribe button, and hit the notification bell in case I decide to upload some more. I plan on making music and horror related content, so if you're into that sort of thing, just do what I just told you. You'd also find me on Instagram at likeableverse if you want to just, because I tend to post more there. So if you want to just see me like play the guitar, then there you go. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Peace out, everybody.